Welcome to the timeline of Western philosophy. My name is Hector and today I'm gonna go into Western philosophy with you. In this video we are gonna make very broad strokes. I'm not saying I'm a professional when it comes to philosophy, I'm just interested in it as I'm reading Nietzsche right now and planning on reading Foucault in the near future. This video is also based on a magazine I read recently called Roadmap Philosophy by Dr. Frank Nissen. It was published in 2011, so it's not the most present or up-to-date source there is, but I think as a broad overview when it comes to philosophy, it will be enough, it will be sufficient. Some disclaimers before I start. I am not a professional when it comes to philosophy, just as I said, just an interested person. Also, we're gonna focus on Western philosophy because Eastern philosophy is not really my main interest right now. Apart from that, feel free to correct me, I will get things wrong. My general intent with this video is to give a temporal context so people can better understand how philosophy came to be and what the discourse was about during the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. This video is going to be divided into 4 ages. We're going to start with the Antiquity, then go on to the Middle Ages, then the Age of Reasons or Renaissance, and then modern times until today. We're also going to have 5 ages of philosophy, 5 different schools or generations, I would say, of philosophers, starting off with nature philosophy, going into the 3 ancient classics from ancient Greek, then going into the Middle Ages, then Renaissance or Age of Reason, and then modern times. So let's start off with the Antiquity. We are 600 BC right now, starting with nature philosophy. The age of nature philosophers and sophists was from 600 BC until right about 371 BC. Major questions were, what is the world made of and how does it function? We have 4 very important philosophers here: Thales, Pythagoras, Heraclit and Demokrit. Basically all of them were mathematicians or at least scientists to some degree, and they had different approaches when it came to the basic element that made up our world. We had Thales, who thought that water was the basis for everything. Next up is Pythagoras, who you might know from math class and his theorem regarding triangles. And we have Heraclit and Demokrit, with Demokrit actually thinking about the smallest possible particle, the atom. He came up with that 2000 years ago. Next to these 4, we had the sophists. This was a group of people and they were practical philosophers. They gave advice in exchange for money and wrote letters or speeches. This group was generally criticized by other philosophers because they made the philosophy fit the client. So they had a client, the client paid them, and then they found some reasoning for the thing that their client wanted to hear. The sophists believed that there is no possibility of objective truth and that therefore everything is subjective. Following that came the 3 ancient classics. This was the era from 469 BC to 322 BC. And we have the 3 classics: Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. All of these are in connection with each other and either learned from another or criticized one another, or basically both. If it wasn't for Plato, we wouldn't know anything about Socrates because he didn't write anything down. Socrates was kind of an unruly character in ancient Athens. He went around asking people questions, making them realize the contradictions in their everyday lives and beliefs. He even was sentenced to death in the end. Special thing about him, he didn't like the written word. He said only the spoken word is the true word. And he had the Socratean dialogue, which meant asking questions and getting you into a corner mentally for you to contradict yourself and learn about yourself and make yourself learn. He was kind of a teacher. Then we had Plato following him, who was an idealist. Plato believed that there is a pure world of knowledge or in a world of ideas, and then there's our world, which is basically a shadowy figure of these pure ideas. For example, he had the idea of a horse, and there's a basic idea of a horse, and every horse that you can see in everyday life is just a copy of that, or just one version of that. And last but not least, we have Aristotle, who's kind of the godfather, the founding father of science and empirism, with him trying to see the truth not in a kingdom of ideas, but in the world around him and how nature functioned, trying to understand how the rules of nature work in conjunction with each other. So we had kind of the first thesis and antithesis in philosophy, with Plato believing in the kingdom of ideas and idealism, and Aristotle believing in the world around him, materialism and empirism. Moving on to Hellenism and Neoplatonism, following the three classics from 400 BC up until 270 AD. Hellenism was the time where ancient Greece was a very big empire, reaching far east and west, with different ideas, ideologies, cultures and traditions meeting, clashing and mixing, leading to very interesting thoughts. In this age we're gonna encounter some characters that you might even have heard of, like Diogenes, who lived in a barrel. He was the founding father of cynicism. He was very provocative, like a more unruly Socrates. He preached minimalism and an ascetic lifestyle and was against any form of property or letting yourself be greedy. Then we have Epicure. He taught ataraxia, which was basically trying to find sustainable happiness. Not reaching for the highest highs or the lowest lows, but finding something that's sustainable throughout your life. A little more dramatic was Xenon of Ctesiphon, who taught stoicism and apathy. Not feeling much, not feeling anything at all. But not because life beat you into depression, for example, but because you chose to. Taking the world as it is and not letting your insides be controlled by the outside factors. Other teachers of Stoicism are Marcus Aurelius or Seneca. And in this age, we had a new version of Plato, Neoplatonism by Plotin. I know, very similar. Plato, Plotin. So Plotin came after Plato. He's also an idealist, and he also believes in the kingdom of thought, or the godly or the heavenly, and then puts this into perspective and kind of has a structure with things being closer to God or the heavenly and things farther from God. Going into the Middle Ages, spanning from around 500 AD to 1450, we have a revamp or instrumentalization of the philosophy that came before in regards to the Christian Church. For example, Aurelius Augustinus took Plato's world of ideas, kingdom of ideas, and basically labeled it God. That this pure world and this pure ideas that we just see pictures of in our everyday life is God. Anselm of Canterbury tried a more witty and logical approach. He said, try and imagine something bigger than God. You can't. This is evidence for God existing. Yeah, his colleagues didn't really understand that as well. And then there's Thomas of Aquin, who really had an interesting way of looking at things. And he said that there should be something that puts something else into order. So he was kind of the Aristotle of the Middle Ages, because he said there is a necessity for the primum movens, for the first act or the first burst of energy, or something that put everything else into commotion, into motion. And he looked at the world and saw that everything worked with each other. Everything kind of had a sense to it, and it was a system that made sense. And he said, something or someone had to put this into place. This doesn't just fall into place. And he said that this is evidence for God existing. During the Middle Ages, we had the big teachings of big schools of patristic and scholastic, with patristic taking old approaches of philosophy and using these as evidence for God, or kind of turning them and making them fit into a Christian worldview, and scholastic or scholasticism with building monasteries that discussed, wrote and copied teachings to kind of find this order in where Christian beliefs and the Christian system made sense and was supported. And now there is a very big time jump, time gap, with the Middle Ages being so long, and we're in 1450. starting with the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, spanning from 450 or 1500 to 1800. Renaissance meant rediscovering the ancient times, finer arts, and the thoughts that came before us, and trying to make up for the time that we lost during the Middle Ages. The big question during this age was, how can we make objectively true statements about the world around us? We had two big parties, or two big groups of people, empirists and rationalists. Empirists saying we have to look at the world and induce from the things we see what is true and the rules that we can make up from that. And then we had rationalists saying that the only objective truth we can make is one that stems from and lives inside our mind or inside our knowledge, for example, math. A famous rationalist was René Descartes. He believed that we have to deduce from thought and reason what the world is like. He said the famous quote, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am. This shows how he viewed the world and how reason and knowledge was the basis upon which he tried to discover the world or understand the world. In his system, there was still a place for God, who synchronizes the res extensa, so the world around us, and the res cogitans, so the world of reason and our mind. On the other hand, we had John Locke and David Hume, who believed that we need our senses to learn and to gain insights, at least on the surface level. We have to make experiences and see things over and over again to make the assumption that something is the way it is, or that something follows certain rules. Of course, there were other philosophers as well. For example, Baruch de Spinoza, who was a rationalist and believed that God is all-encompassing and that we are just a part of that, and that we as humans can merely see some factors of it, for example, time and space. And as far as I know, that's a theme that comes up in Eastern philosophy as well, in regards to the heavenly or the godly being in the world around us or nature. Then we had Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who we might know as a mathematician and scientist as well, but he wrote some philosophical pieces as well. He was an idealist as well and believed in the so-called monads, which are packets of energy that have programs that work in conjunction with each other, and that God is just the first monad, and that we're all just packets of energy, and that our bodies are just the appearance of them. I might have to get into that because that sounds very mystical to me. Another interesting character was George Berkeley, who thought that perceiving is existing or being perceived, because if there's no one to think about something, is it really existing? Does it really exist apart from you perceiving it, thinking about it? Which is a very interesting approach as well. During the time of the Renaissance, we also had big leaps in theory regarding social contracts and how the human is made up naturally. So we have Thomas Hobbes, who says lupus est homo homini, man is wolf to man, with him saying that in a natural setting we as humans are generally designed to fight over things, that we live in insecurity and that kind of the fittest survives. And on the other hand, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said that the humans are peaceful in nature and that kind of science and progress and wealth and society lead to us going into wars or fighting over resources. With the 1800s, we enter modern times in philosophy, spanning until now, although one could argue that we're in the postmodern age of philosophy as well. Modern philosophy starts out with Immanuel Kant and his Copernican revolution. Copernicus was an ancient thinker or a thinker in the Middle Ages who said that the sun is revolving around Earth and not the other way around. In the same way he changed the worldview, Immanuel Kant changed the perspective on how we view philosophy. During the Renaissance, rationalists and empirists thought over how we can view the objective world. Kant said that one thing both these parties can agree on, that we as humans are at fault and that we as humans are the basis upon which we perceive the world around us or reality. That's why philosophy should see what the burdens or what the limitations of humans are to find out what is right and wrong. The same way Immanuel Kant put an emphasis on personal experience, we can understand Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a nihilist. Schopenhauer's view of the world encompassed a drive in every living thing to thrive and die in the end. And he said that we cannot escape this. You can never be the master of your will. You just want something and can't control it. Therefore, there is no free will. Schopenhauer is also called the artist's philosopher at times because he believes that the thing to escape this drive of the world is making art, because art in itself is just making you happy in the moment. You're present. It kind of has no purpose and doesn't serve the drive of survival. At the same time, Arthur Schopenhauer was a philosophy professor. There was Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who was an idealist. He established the Hegelian dialectic, talking about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. He believed that there's a drive in the world, just like Schopenhauer. But he didn't think that this was aimless or without reason, like Schopenhauer did, but he thought that this had a direction. We as humans developing into a higher state or reaching an end goal. He said that this works through a certain process. We have a thesis, an antithesis, and the combination of these, or the neglecting of these, leads to a synthesis. As an example, during the Renaissance or Age of Reason, we had the rationalists and empirists fighting over an objective world and how we can make assessments over that. And then Kant came around, made a synthesis and said, you're both wrong, we have to look at the human, we are limited as humans, therefore we can say there is an objective world. This drive that Hegel thought about was the so-called Weltgeist. Inspired by this, Karl Marx came up with his communist ideas. He said that the Weltgeist, or the thesis and antithesis, should be looked on through the lens of resources and how resources are divided in society, and that at some point we have resources available for everyone. After that, we had Friedrich Nietzsche, who I am reading right now actually, who was kind of the son of Schopenhauer, at least regarding the ideas he had. He was a nihilist as well, but he was more positive than Schopenhauer was. Nietzsche, on the other hand, said that we have to take pride as humans, as something that can evolve, as something that can lead to greater things. Therefore, his theory on the Übermensch, trying to strive and reach new heights to give this drive meaning. Nietzsche also said the famous quote, "God is dead," which shows his opinion on church and religion in general. A little bit later, we also had Martin Heidegger, which is a controversial figure with him being part of the NSDAP Nazi party, but he talked about giving your own life reason and meaning and kind of taking your life into your own hands, a little bit like Nietzsche did. Martin Heidegger was an existentialist. Other famous existentialists were Camus or Sartre. The basis or thoughts coming before existentialism were laid by Kierkegaard. In conjunction with Kant kind of ushering in this new era of philosophy, we also had other ideas coming from Sigmund Freud in regards to psychoanalysis and how we view the human. He established the famous system of id, ego and superego, with id being our desires and our drives, superego the rules that were laid out for us as children or in society, the way we were socialized, and the ego being the in-between party trying to put these into harmony. He also established psychoanalysis and laid the groundwork for how psychoanalysis works today, although there is a lot to be criticized with how he viewed the world and how he came up with his ideas in regards to family and gender roles. The First and Second World War also provided a lot of reason to think about good and evil and how humans can do these atrocious things. Hannah Arendt, for example, talked about the Nazi regime and the totalitarian system, as well as the effects on the people living inside these systems. Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, who were also influenced by these wars, talked about how the modern life and how industrialization led to us being slaves to our consumption. Karl R. Popper and Thomas S. Kuhn talked about how science is just a shift in paradigms and how science can also be used as a way to take your personal beliefs and instill them into other people. They also were critical of the scientific process and were hesitant to let science be the basis for every decision. The last philosopher on this list is Ludwig Wittgenstein, who says that language is the basis upon which we interact and how we describe the world or describe concepts. Therefore, the more you learn about language, the more you learn about how our world works and how we view the world. Interesting side note, in my religion class in school we had a big picture of Ludwig Wittgenstein on the wall, and now, 4 to 5 years later, I understand. And now we're all up to date. Just like I said, some broad strokes and general statements, some names that you might have heard or should have heard. I believe that it can't hurt to know a bit about philosophy, because just the way people argue or just the way people try to find reason in things is interesting in general and helps you develop as a human. Like I said, I have personal interests in these topics and I would like to educate people as far as I can and go into discussion. So if there's anything you want to share, let me know down below. I would really appreciate if you like this video and maybe follow for more philosophy content. Thank you and have a good day.